She crashed through the manzanita brush with blood streaming down her arm and terror carved into her face like stone. The Northern California forest swallowed her screams. Behind her, the crack of rifles split the mountain air. And she knew with bone-deep certainty that the next bullet would not miss. Her name was Thea Bowman, 24 years old. Daughter of a timber merchant who thought gold and influence could buy anything in these wild territories, including a husband for his difficult daughter. She had been promised to Garrett Hollis, a mine owner twice her age with eyes like a snake and hands that felt like ownership every time they touched her. 3 days ago, she had finally said no. 2 days ago, she ran. Today, Garrett's hired guns were close enough that she could hear them calling her name, through the trees like hunters calling to cornered prey. The October sun barely penetrated the dense canopy of redwoods towering above her. These ancient giants had stood for 1,000 years, their massive trunks rising like the pillars of some vast cathedral. Their presence should have made her feel small and protected, but instead, she felt exposed, visible, marked for death. Her cream-colored dress, once fine enough for Sunday service, now hung in tatters. Branches had torn the fabric at the sleeves and hem. Blood soaked through where she had fallen twice already, dark stains spreading across the pale fabric like accusations. Her lungs burned with every breath she dragged in. The mountain slope was steep and unforgiving, covered in a treacherous carpet of dead leaves that shifted under her boots with each desperate step. She had no idea where she was running to, only what she was running from. Garrett had made it clear the night she refused him, the night she told him in front of her father and half the town council that she would rather die alone than marry him. He had smiled that cold smile, the one that never reached his eyes, and told her in a voice smooth as poisoned honey that women who embarrassed powerful men did not get second chances. They got lessons instead. Her father had stood there in silence, his face turned away toward the window, and that silence told her everything she needed to know about where his loyalties lived. Gold trumped blood. Business trumped family. Her future had been sold before she even knew it was for sale. Another gunshot cracked through the air. This one close. Too close. The bullet slammed into a tree trunk inches from her head, sending bark exploding in all directions like wooden shrapnel. Thea ducked instinctively and felt her boot catch on an exposed root. She went down hard, her shoulders smashing against a fallen log covered in moss. Pain shot through her like lightning striking twice in the same place. For a moment, she could not breathe, could not think, could only lie there in the dirt and leaves while her body screamed at her to stop, to give up, to let the darkness take her. But stopping meant dying, or worse, it meant going back. It meant Garrett's hands on her again. It meant standing at an altar in a white dress while promises were spoken that she would never mean. It meant a lifetime of being owned, used, discarded when she was no longer useful. That future terrified her more than any bullet. She pushed herself up on shaking arms. Blood ran from a fresh gash on her forehead now, mixing with the sweat and dirt already covering her face. Her vision blurred. The forest seemed to tilt and spin like she was on the deck of a ship in rough seas. She forced herself forward, crawling at first like some wounded animal, then stumbling to her feet with a sound that was half sob and half snarl. Through the trees ahead, she saw something that made her heart leap with desperate hope. Smoke rising in a thin gray line above the canopy. Not the thick black smoke of a forest fire that would spell death in a different way, but the controlled smoke of a cooking fire or a forge. Someone lived out here in this wilderness. Someone who might help, or at least someone who might make Garrett think twice about shooting her in front of a witness. Even monsters sometimes feared witnesses. She pushed toward it with everything she had left. Her legs felt like they were made of wet rope, barely able to support her weight. Every step was a negotiation with her body, a desperate bargain struck between will and flesh. The voices behind her grew louder, more confident. Garrett's men were spreading out now, trying to circle around and cut off her escape. She could hear them calling to each other, coordinating their hunt. They knew these mountains better than she did. They knew she was wounded. They knew it was only a matter of time before she collapsed or made a mistake that would cost her everything. "Over here," one of them shouted. "Fresh blood on these leaves." She came this way. Thea bit back a whimper and forced her legs to move faster. The trees opened suddenly into a small clearing, and she nearly sobbed with relief. A cabin stood there, rough-hewn logs chinked with moss and mud, a stone chimney leaking that precious smoke into the cold mountain air. Beside it, a lean dish sheltered what looked like curing racks for animal hides. Deer and elk probably, stretched and scraped clean. Deer antlers hung from the eaves like trophies or offerings to some forgotten god. A water barrel sat near the door, its surface reflecting the pale sky. This was not a miner's claim or a timber camp. This was someone who lived off the land itself, someone who knew how to survive in a place that killed most newcomers within a season. She stumbled forward into the clearing just as another shot rang out. This time the bullet found her. The impact hit her left shoulder from behind and spun her completely around like some cruel dance partner had grabbed her and twisted. She did not feel pain at first, just a massive force that knocked her off her feet and sent her sprawling face first into the dirt. Then the pain arrived, white-hot and all-consuming, radiating from her shoulder blade down through her entire left side like fire spreading through dry grass. Thea tried to scream, but nothing came out except a choked gasp. She could feel the bullet lodge deep in the muscle near her shoulder blade, a foreign object that did not belong inside her body, a piece of lead and malice that had burrowed into her flesh like some parasitic thing. Her left arm would not move properly. When she tried to push herself up, her hand just dragged uselessly through the dirt. Fingers scraping at nothing, the cabin door opened. Through her blurred vision, Thea saw a figure emerge into the daylight. Tall, easily over 6 feet, broad-shouldered, moving with the kind of fluid grace that spoke of someone completely at home in this wilderness, someone who belonged here in a way she never could. He wore buckskin pants darkened with use and a simple dark shirt that had seen better days. His black hair hung loose past his shoulders, moving slightly in the mountain breeze. His face was weathered and strong, marked by both sun and time, with high cheekbones and dark eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. This was no miner, no logger, no white settler at all. Noden stopped when he saw her. For a long moment, he simply stood there on his threshold, taking in the scene with those dark eyes that missed nothing. The blood pooling beneath her, the torn dress, the way she lay broken in his yard like something that had fallen from a great height or been thrown there by uncaring hands. Then he looked past her, toward the tree line where the shouts of Garrett's men grew closer by the second, where branches snapped and voices called out coordinates like soldiers closing in on an enemy position. He crossed the clearing in 4 long strides and knelt beside her. His hands moved over her with professional efficiency, checking the wound, assessing the damage with the calm precision of someone who had treated injuries before. When his fingers found the entry wound in her back, Thea jerked and tried to pull away. A sound came out of her that was half protest and half pure animal fear, the kind of sound that came from somewhere deeper than thought. "Stop, not there," she gasped. The pain was so intense it made her vision go white at the edges, narrowing the world down to just that single point of agony. "Please do not touch it. Please." Noden's voice was calm, steady as bedrock, the kind of voice that did not waver in the face of crisis. "Bullet is deep, lodged against the bone. If it stays, infection will kill you in 3 days. Maybe 2 if you are unlucky." His English was perfect, barely accented, but there was something in the cadence that marked him as someone who had learned the language rather than been born to it. Each word was chosen with care, placed with precision. "I cannot," Thea whispered. Tears streamed down her face, cutting tracks through the dirt and blood. "I cannot do this. Please just let me." "Let you what?" Noden interrupted, his tone sharpening slightly. "Let you die here in my yard? Let those men take you back to whatever hell you ran from." He glanced toward the trees where branches were snapping now as Garrett's hired guns closed in, their voices growing bolder. "You ran this far. You fought this hard. You bled across half this mountain to get here. You do not get to quit now. Not when you are this close to surviving." He slid his arms under her and lifted her like she weighed nothing at all, like she was made of paper and air instead of flesh and bone. Thea cried out as the movement jarred her wounded shoulder, sending fresh waves of agony radiating through her body, but Noden did not slow down. He carried her into the cabin and kicked the door shut behind them with enough force to rattle the frame. The interior was dim and cool, smelling of wood smoke and dried herbs and leather and something else she could not quite name. He laid her down on a low bed covered in furs, bear and wolf probably, and moved immediately to bar the door with a heavy wooden beam. Outside, the voices arrived in the clearing. Thea heard Garrett's distinctive drawl, smooth and poisonous like expensive whiskey mixed with arsenic. "Now, Noden, I know you are in there. And I know you got something that belongs to me. That girl is my property, bought and paid for. Her father took my money. We had an agreement. Send her out and there will be no trouble between us. You have my word on that." Noden did not answer. He moved to the stone fireplace where coals still glowed from his morning fire, pulsing like a living heart. He selected several iron tools from a rack on the wall, the kind used for working leather and metal, for shaping and cutting and cauterizing. He thrust them into the coals without a word, adjusting them so the tips would heat evenly, so they would get hot enough to do what needed doing. Thea watched him with growing horror. She understood now what he intended to do. The bullet had to come out, and out here in the wilderness, miles from the nearest town, there were no doctors, no hospitals, no chloroform or laudanum to dull the pain. There was only heat and a sharp blade and someone willing to cut into living flesh to save a life. There was only this stranger and his tools and the thin line between surviving and dying. "You are going to dig it out," she said. Her voice shook like leaves in a storm. "You are going to cut me open and dig around inside me until you find it." Noden pulled one of the tools from the fire. The tip glowed red like a small piece of captured sun. He tested it against a scrap of leather on his workbench, which hissed and curled away from the heat, leaving a dark brand. Then he looked at her with those dark, unreadable eyes that had seen too much and survived anyway. "Yes, and you are going to let me, because the alternative is worse. The alternative is dying slowly over the next few days while fever eats your mind and infection turns your blood to poison. I have seen it before. It is not a good death. I do not even know you," Thea said desperately, her words tumbling over each other. "You could be anyone. You could be worse than them. You could, if I wanted to hurt you, I would have left you in the dirt for the crows," Noden replied, cutting through her panic with simple logic. He moved to the bed and knelt beside her, his presence somehow both threatening and comforting at once. "Now we do not have much time. They will try to break in soon, and I need you conscious when that happens. I need you able to move if things go bad. Can you sit up?" Thea tried. The pain that lanced through her shoulder made her head spin and her stomach heave. Black spots danced in her vision. Noden caught her before she fell back and propped her against the wall with surprising gentleness, arranging the furs around her for support. He grabbed a strip of leather from his workbench, thick and well-worn, darkened with use and time. "Bite this," he said, pressing it between her teeth with firm but careful hands. "It will help, and it will keep you from biting through your tongue when the pain comes. Trust me, you do not want that injury on top of everything else." Thea's eyes went wide above the leather strip. She tried to shake her head, to push him away with her good arm, but her body would not obey. The shock and blood loss had stolen too much of her strength. Nodin pulled her torn dress aside to expose the wound fully. Blood welled up dark and steady, pooling in the hollow near her shoulder blade. He pressed a clean cloth against it to clear his view. And Thea whimpered behind the leather strip, the sound muffled but desperate. The bullet went in at an angle, Nodin explained, his voice maddeningly calm, like he was discussing the weather or the price of flour. It is lodged against your shoulder blade. I can feel the edge of it through the muscle. I need to widen the wound to reach it, then use heat to seal the bleeding after. The human body bleeds out faster than most people think. If I do not do this now, if I wait even an hour, you die. Do you understand what I am telling you? Thea nodded. What choice did she have? Behind the barred door, Garrett's voice rose again, angrier now, the smooth veneer cracking to reveal the violence underneath. Nodin, I am losing patience. You are harboring my property. That is theft under territorial law. Now open this door, or we will burn you out. I will reduce this cabin to ash with both of you inside, if that is what it takes. Nodin ignored him completely, his focus entirely on the woman bleeding on his bed. He positioned the heated tool near Thea's wound, close enough that she could feel the radiating heat before it even touched her skin. When I start, do not fight me. The more you move, the worse this gets. The more damage I do to healthy tissue trying to chase the bullet. Breathe through your nose. Focus on something besides the pain. Find something to anchor yourself to and hold on. Thea tried to find something, anything, to anchor herself to. Her eyes landed on Nodin's face, on the concentration written there in the lines around his eyes and mouth, on the steadiness of his hands despite what he was about to do. This was a man who had done hard things before. A man who had made impossible choices and lived with them. A man who did not flinch from what was necessary, even when necessary meant causing pain to save a life. The heated metal touched her flesh. The sound that came out of Thea was barely human, a raw animal cry that the leather strip could not fully contain. The pain was unlike anything she had ever experienced, worse than the bullet itself. A burning, tearing agony that seemed to consume her entire existence. She could smell her own flesh cooking, that distinct sickening smell of burning meat. Could feel Nodin's hands holding her steady as she tried instinctively to pull away. Her body's survival instinct screaming at her to escape the source of pain. Almost there, Nodin murmured, his voice cutting through the red haze of agony. His hand pressed against her collarbone, keeping her pinned against the wall, his strength absolute. The wound is open enough now. I can see the bullet. Just a little more. Thea's vision narrowed to a tunnel. The edges went dark and fuzzy. She could hear her own heartbeat thundering in her ears like distant drums, could feel her pulse hammering against the inside of her skull with each systolic beat. Nodin reached for another tool, this one thin and precise. Designed for extracting things from tight spaces, for pulling out splinters and arrowheads and bullets outside. Something heavy slammed against the cabin door. Once, twice, the whole structure shuddered with the impact. Garrett's patience had finally broken completely. "Break it down," he shouted to his men. "I want that girl, and I want her now. I do not care what you have to do to get her." The door shuddered with each impact, dust falling from the frame. Nodin glanced toward it, his jaw tightening, a muscle jumping in his cheek, but his hands never wavered. He slid the extraction tool into Thea's wound with agonizing slowness, probing for the bullet, feeling his way through torn muscle and damaged tissue. Thea's back arched off the furs. Her hands clawed at the bed beneath her, nails digging into the fur. Every muscle in her body locked rigid, her teeth clamping down on the leather strip so hard she thought it might break. "Got it," Nodin said quietly. There was a sound like metal scraping on metal, a grating that she felt in her bones. Then a wet pop as the bullet came free, pulled from where it had buried itself against her shoulder blade. He dropped it on the floor where it landed with a small clink, rolling once before stopping. Blood flowed more freely now, released from the pressure of the foreign object. And Nodin grabbed the hottest of his tools from the fire with a cloth wrapped around the handle. "One more time," he said, meeting her eyes with something that might have been sympathy or might have been simple acknowledgement of shared suffering. "This is the worst part, but it saves your life. After this, the hard part is over." He pressed the glowing metal directly into the wound. The smell of burning flesh filled the cabin, acrid and nauseating. Thea screamed behind the leather strip, a sound of pure animal agony that seemed to come from somewhere deeper than her lungs. Her body convulsed, every muscle contracting at once, her spine bowing. For a moment, she thought she would die right there, that her heart would simply stop from the shock, unable to process any more pain, but it did not. Her heart kept beating. Her lungs kept pulling in air. Nodin held the tool steady for exactly 3 seconds that felt like 3 hours, then pulled it away. The bleeding had stopped. The wound was sealed, crude but effective, the flesh cauterized closed. Thea's head lolled against the wall. The leather strip fell from her slack jaw, landing wet on her lap. She was conscious but barely, her eyes glazed with pain and shock, her mind floating somewhere between awareness and oblivion. The cabin door splintered. One of the hinges gave way with a screech of protesting metal. Through the growing gap, Thea could see Garrett's face, red with rage and exertion, veins standing out on his forehead. His eyes found her slumped against the wall, found the blood and the burns and the defeated way she sat there. And the smile that spread across his face made her blood run cold, despite the fever heat of her wound. Nodin stood. He moved to his weapons rack with deliberate calm and selected a rifle, checking it with practiced ease, his fingers moving through the motions automatically. Then he turned to face the breaking door, placing himself between it and Thea. His voice was quiet, but it carried a weight that made even Garrett pause mid-kick. "You can come in if you want, but I promise you, not all of you will walk back out. Some of you will stay here permanently." Garrett laughed, but there was an edge of uncertainty in it now, a crack in his confidence. "You would risk your life for some white girl you do not even know? What is she to you? What could she possibly mean to a man like you?" Nodin chambered around, the metallic click loud in the sudden silence. "She is someone who needs help. That is enough. That is all it needs to be." And as the door finally gave way completely and Garrett's men poured into the cabin with guns raised in murder in their eyes, Thea understood something with absolute clarity. She had run from one man who saw her as property, as a thing to be owned and used, and found another who saw her as human, as a person worthy of protection simply because she needed it. The difference between those two things might be the difference between death and life, but which one would she get? That answer was about to be decided in blood and gunfire and the thin space between mercy and violence. The first man through the door never saw the rifle butt coming. Nodin moved like water, fluid and inevitable, swinging the stock in a tight arc that connected with the hired gun's jaw. The crack echoed through the cabin like a tree branch snapping. The man dropped without a sound, his weapon clattering across the floorboards. Garrett stood in the doorway, framed by afternoon light, his hand resting on the pistol at his hip. Behind him, 3 more men waited with rifles raised. The odds were poor, and everyone in that cabin knew it. But Nodin did not move from his position between them and Thea. He simply stood there, rifle held loose but ready, his dark eyes calculating distances and angles. "That was a mistake," Garrett said softly. His voice had gone cold, all pretense of civility stripped away. "That man was worth 5 times what you will ever be worth. You just signed your own death warrant, then come collect it," Nodin replied. His tone never changed, never rose, never betrayed anything resembling fear. "But understand something first. I am Cahto. My people have been hunting these mountains since before your grandfathers crossed the ocean. You are in my territory now. You are the ones at a disadvantage, one of Garrett's men, a thick-necked brute with a scarred face, laughed. You hear that, boys? The savage thinks he owns the mountain. Someone should tell him that his people do not own anything anymore. The words were still hanging in the air when Nodin moved. He grabbed a clay pot from the shelf beside him and hurled it at the stone fireplace. The pot shattered, and whatever had been inside splashed across the hot coals. Flames erupted instantly, a wall of fire that roared up and across the hearth, filling half the cabin with choking smoke and sudden heat. Garrett's men stumbled backward, cursing and coughing. Thea pressed herself against the wall, her good hand covering her mouth and nose. Through the smoke and confusion, she saw Nodin grab her by the waist and pull her toward the back of the cabin. Her wounded shoulder screamed in protest, but she bit down on the pain and moved. There is a door, Nodin said directly into her ear, his breath warm against her skin. Behind those hides. Can you walk? Thea nodded, though she was not sure it was true. Her legs felt like they belonged to someone else, distant and unreliable. Nodin pushed aside a rack of curing deer hides to reveal a small door, barely large enough for a man to squeeze through. He shoved it open, and cold mountain air rushed in. Behind them, Garrett was shouting orders through the smoke. Around back. Cut them off before they reach the trees. Do not let that girl get away again. Nodin practically carried Thea through the door and into the forest behind his cabin. The trees here grew so close together that their branches intertwined overhead, creating a canopy so dense that little sunlight penetrated. The ground was covered in a thick carpet of pine needles that muffled their footsteps. He did not stop moving, did not slow down, just kept pulling her forward with one arm around her waist while his other hand held the rifle. Where are we going? Thea gasped. Each step sent jolts of pain through her shoulder, and she could feel fresh blood seeping through the crude cauterization. The smell of her own burned flesh made her stomach turn. Somewhere they cannot follow, Nodin answered. He veered left suddenly, following what looked like a game trail that Thea never would have noticed. There are places in these mountains that white men do not know about. Places my people have kept hidden for generations. A gunshot cracked behind them, close enough that Thea heard the bullet whip through the branches overhead. She stumbled and would have fallen if Nodin had not been holding her. He pulled her behind a massive redwood trunk, pressing them both against the rough bark. His breathing was steady despite their flight, while hers came in ragged gasps that tasted of blood and smoke. Listen to me, Nodin said, his face inches from hers. They will spread out now. Try to surround us. But these men are not trackers. They are thugs who know how to break bones and intimidate shopkeepers. In the forest, they are prey pretending to be predators. There are 4 of them, Thea whispered. 5 counting Garrett. Even if they are not trackers, numbers matter. Numbers matter less than knowing the ground, Nodin replied. He peered around the tree trunk, his eyes scanning the forest with the kind of attention that missed nothing. Stay close to me. Step where I step. Touch nothing that I do not touch first. They moved again, this time at an angle that took them deeper into the forest and higher up the mountain slope. Thea's legs burned with the effort of climbing. Her shoulder throbbed with each heartbeat, a steady drumbeat of agony that made her vision blur at the edges. She wanted to ask how much farther, wanted to beg for rest, but she saved her breath for moving. The sound of pursuit followed them through the trees. Garrett's men were not quiet. They crashed through the underbrush like bulls, breaking branches and cursing when thorns caught their clothes. Thea heard Garrett's voice calling out, trying to sound reasonable and failing. Thea, honey, this has gone far enough. Come back now and we will forget all about this. Nobody needs to get hurt anymore. The endearment made her skin crawl. She pressed closer to Nodin, taking comfort in his solid presence, in the way he moved through the forest like he was part of it. They climbed for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. The trees began to change, becoming more sparse, the air growing thinner and colder. They were gaining elevation quickly. Nodin stopped suddenly. Ahead of them, the ground fell away into a steep ravine. A stream ran at the bottom, white water rushing over dark rocks. The only way across was a fallen log, ancient and covered in moss, spanning the gap like a natural bridge. It looked treacherous even to someone in perfect health. "You cannot be serious," Thea said, staring at the log.
Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you.
"I can barely walk. You expect me to cross that?" "I expect you to survive," Nodin said. He stepped onto the log first, testing it with his weight. It held, though it shifted slightly under him. He turned back to her and extended his hand. "I will go first. You follow directly behind me. Keep your eyes on my back, not on the drop. Trust your feet." Thea looked behind them. She could hear Garrett's men getting closer, their voices carrying through the trees. The scarred man was shouting something about how he was going to enjoy what came next, his words crude and violent. The choice was not really a choice at all. She took Nodin's hand. The log was slippery under her boots. Thea felt it shift with each step, felt the empty air yawning beneath her. Her wounded shoulder threw off her balance, making her list to one side. Nodin's hand gripped hers like iron, steadying her, pulling her forward inch by inch. The sound of rushing water filled her ears, drowning out everything else. They were halfway across when Garrett's men burst out of the tree line behind them. The scarred man raised his rifle immediately, sighting down the barrel. Thea saw it happening like it was unfolding in slow motion. Saw his finger tighten on the trigger. Saw Nodin's body tense as he calculated whether they could make it across before the bullet arrived. The shot rang out. But it was not the scarred man who fired. It was Garrett, and he was not aiming at them. He was aiming at the log itself. The bullet struck the wood where it rested on the far bank, sending splinters flying. The ancient timber groaned, shifted, began to slip. "Run," Nodin said. He did not shout it, but the urgency was absolute. He pulled Thea forward, both of them racing across the remaining distance as the log tilted beneath them. 3 more steps. 2. 1. They leaped together as the log finally gave way, tumbling end over end into the ravine below. Thea hit the far bank hard, her wounded shoulder taking the impact. The pain was so intense that for a moment she could not see, could not breathe, could not do anything except exist in that white-hot space where agony lived. Nodin landed beside her and immediately rolled to his feet, pulling her up with him. Across the ravine, Garrett stood with his men, staring at the gap between them. It was too wide to jump, too steep to climb down and back up quickly. For the moment, they were safe. But the look on Garrett's face promised that this was far from over. "This is not done, Thea," Garrett called across the water. "You think you can hide in these mountains forever? You think your savage protector can keep you safe? I own half this territory. I have men in every town, every mining camp, every trading post. Sooner or later, you will have to come down from this mountain. And when you do, I will be waiting." Nodin said nothing. He simply turned and guided Thea away from the ravine, deeper into the high country where few white men ever ventured. Thea looked back once and saw Garrett still standing there, a dark figure framed against the afternoon light, and she understood with cold certainty that he had spoken the truth. This was not over. It might never be over. They walked for another hour, maybe more. Thea lost track of time. The pain in her shoulder had settled into a constant burning ache that colored everything. Her legs moved on pure stubbornness now, with no strength left to draw from. Finally, when she was certain she could not take another step, Nodin stopped. They had reached a place where massive boulders lay scattered across the mountainside like toys dropped by some giant child. Between two of the largest rocks, hidden from casual view, was a narrow opening. Nodin led her through it into a small cave. The interior was surprisingly dry and warm, protected from the wind. Someone had used this place before. There were old fire rings, stacked firewood, clay pots sealed with wax. Cahto hunting camp, Nodin explained. He lowered Thea gently to the ground and began gathering materials for a fire. My grandfather used to bring me here when I was young. Taught me which plants would heal and which would kill. Which tracks meant deer and which meant mountain lion. How to read the sky for weather and the moss for direction. Why are you helping me? Thea asked. The question had been building in her since he first lifted her from his yard. You do not know me. I brought violence to your home. I cost you your cabin, probably everything you own. Garrett will make you pay for this, so why? Nodin was quiet for a long moment as he worked. He coaxed flame from flint and steel, fed it kindling until it caught and grew. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the weight of old grief. 10 years ago, I had a sister. Her name was Amma, which means water in my language. She was beautiful and kind and too trusting of white men who spoke soft words. He did not continue immediately. He did not need to. Thea understood the shape of the story from his silence. From the pain that flickered across his face like shadows from the growing fire. A man like your Garrett came through our territory, Nodin continued. A traitor. He promised her things. Promised to take her to San Francisco, to show her the world beyond these mountains. She believed him. She left with him one morning, and we never saw her again. Thea's throat tightened. What happened to her? We do not know. Not for certain. But 3 months later, a Pomo woman found her body in a ravine 50 miles from here. She had been used and discarded like something broken that no longer had value. Nodin's hands stilled on the firewood. My father wanted war. Wanted to burn every trading post and kill every white man we could find. But our elders said no. Said that path led only to more death. So we swallowed our grief and tried to keep our people safe by avoiding your kind. I am sorry, Thea whispered. The words felt inadequate, meaningless against such loss. I do not want your apology, Nodin said, meeting her eyes across the fire. I want to make sure that what happened to my sister does not keep happening. That men like Garrett do not get to treat women like property without consequence. You asked why I am helping you. That is why. Because maybe if I save you, it means something. Maybe it means Amma's death was not completely meaningless. Thea felt tears tracking down her dirty face. She had run from Garrett, thinking only of her own survival, her own freedom. She had not considered what her flight might mean to anyone else. Had not thought about the weight of history that her situation carried. I do not want to be a symbol, she said. I just want to be free. Freedom is never just personal, Nodin replied. He reached into one of the sealed pots and pulled out dried herbs. Every choice we make echoes. Every stand we take matters. You think you are just one woman running from one man. But if you give up, if you let him take you back, what does that tell the next woman? What does that tell every other man who thinks he can own another human being? That is too much weight to carry, Thea protested. I am not strong enough for that. You crossed a ravine on a fallen log with a bullet wound in your shoulder, Nodin said. You are stronger than you think. He moved closer and carefully peeled back the fabric near her wound. The cauterization had held, but barely. The flesh around it was angry and red, beginning to swell. He crushed the dried herbs between his palms and mixed them with water from his canteen, creating a paste that smelled sharp and clean. This will hurt, he warned. But it will draw out infection and help the healing. When he applied the paste, Thea gasped, but did not pull away. The pain was different from the cauterization, intense but somehow cleaner, like her body recognized that this was healing rather than harm. Nodin worked with steady hands, covering the wound completely before wrapping it with strips of clean cloth he produced from another pot. "You keep supplies here," Thea observed. "You have been preparing for something." "My people have learned to always be ready," Nodin said. "Ready to flee. Ready to hide. Ready to fight if we must. The world has not been kind to us. So we adapt. We survive." Outside the cave, darkness was falling. The temperature dropped quickly at this elevation, cold enough that Thea could see her breath misting in the firelight. Nodin added more wood to the fire and pulled out a bundle wrapped in oiled cloth. Inside was dried venison, hard journey bread, and some kind of dried berries. He handed half to Thea. "Eat," he commanded. "Your body cannot heal without fuel. And tomorrow will be harder than today." "Tomorrow?" Thea took the food but did not eat immediately. "What happens tomorrow?" "Tomorrow we move again," Nodin said. "Garrett will not give up. He will bring more men, maybe dogs to track us. We need to get you somewhere safe before that happens. Somewhere even his money and influence cannot reach. Does such a place exist?" Thea asked. The question came out smaller than she intended, tinged with despair. Nodin smiled, though there was no humor in it. "There is a place, 3 days north of here. A settlement where people go who do not fit anywhere else. Miners who struck it rich and want privacy. Women escaping bad situations. Men running from the law. Even a few of my people who could not stay on the reservation, but had nowhere else to go. They call it sanctuary, though that name is more hope than fact. 3 days, Thea repeated. In my condition, that might as well be 3 months. Then we will take it slow, Nodin said. And we will take it together. They ate in silence after that. Thea forced down the food even though her stomach rebelled. She knew he was right about needing fuel. Her body was trying to heal from a gunshot wound and a cauterization. It needed everything she could give it. The venison was tough and salty, the bread hard enough to break teeth. But it was food, and she was grateful. As the night deepened, the sounds of the forest changed around them. Distant owl calls. The rustle of small animals moving through the underbrush. Once, the scream of a mountain lion, far enough away to be safe, but close enough to remind them they were not the only predators on this mountain. Tell me about your family, Nodin said suddenly. The father who let you go. What kind of man sells his daughter? Thea was quiet for a long moment, staring into the flames. The kind who loves money more than people, she finally said. My mother died when I was 12. Fever took her in 3 days. After that, my father threw himself into his business, building his timber empire, making deals, accumulating wealth like it could fill the hole she left. I think he stopped seeing me as a daughter somewhere along the way. Started seeing me as just another asset to be leveraged. Did you love him? Nodin asked. Before he betrayed you? I thought I did, Thea said. But maybe I just loved the idea of having a father. The reality was always something different. He was never cruel, not exactly. Just absent. Present in body but gone in every way that mattered. And when he sold you to Garrett? He did not even look me in the eye, Thea said. The memory still had teeth, still bit deep. Just signed the papers and walked out of the room. Like I was a horse he was selling, not his own blood. Nodin nodded slowly. My people have a saying. Blood makes you related. Loyalty makes you family. Your father gave you blood, but not loyalty. That debt is settled. You owe him nothing now. The words settled over Thea like a blanket, warm and unexpectedly comforting. She had been carrying guilt about running, about causing trouble, about being the difficult daughter who could not just accept her fate. But maybe Nodin was right. Maybe she did not owe anyone her suffering. Maybe freedom was something she was allowed to want. Get some rest, Nodin said. He positioned himself near the cave entrance, rifle across his lap. "I will keep watch. If anything comes, I will wake you. You need sleep too," Thea protested. "You cannot stay awake all night. I have done harder things," Nodin assured her. "And besides, sleep comes easier when you know someone is watching over you. Let me give you that gift tonight." Thea wanted to argue further, but exhaustion was pulling at her like a riptide. Her body had been running on fear and adrenaline for too long. Now that she was finally somewhere relatively safe, with food in her belly and warmth at her back, that borrowed energy was draining away. She lay down near the fire, using her good arm as a pillow. Just before sleep took her, she heard Nodin begin to sing, soft and low, in a language she did not understand. The melody was ancient and beautiful, rising and falling like the wind through the trees. It spoke of sorrow and endurance, of people who had survived everything the world threw at them and kept going anyway. And wrapped in that song, with firelight dancing on the cave walls and a stranger standing guard between her and the darkness. Thea Bowman slept, but even in sleep, part of her remained alert. Part of her knew that Garrett was still out there, still hunting, still determined to drag her back into the cage she had escaped. And when morning came, the chase would begin again. Dawn came cold and gray, creeping into the cave like an unwelcome guest. Thea woke to find Nodin already moving, packing supplies with quiet efficiency. Her shoulder had stiffened during the night, the pain now a deep, constant ache that radiated down her arm and across her back. When she tried to sit up, her body protested every movement. "How far did you sleep?" she asked, her voice rough from smoke and exhaustion. "Enough," Nodin replied without turning. He was crushing more of the healing herbs, mixing them with bear grease from a small clay pot. "Your wound needs fresh dressing before we move. And you need to eat something. We have a hard day ahead." Thea accepted the strip of dried meat he offered and chewed slowly. Her mouth was dry, her tongue thick. Every part of her wanted to stay in this cave, to hide from what waited outside. But she could see in the set of Nodin's shoulders that staying was not an option. Garrett would be organizing his search by now, calling in favors, maybe even hiring more men. Nodin knelt beside her and carefully unwrapped the bandage from the previous night. The wound looked better than she expected, the angry redness reduced to a dull pink. The herbal paste had formed a crust over the cauterized flesh. When he applied fresh medicine, the sting made her inhale sharply through her teeth. "The swelling is down," he observed. "Your body is strong. It wants to heal. But infection is still possible, especially if we push too hard. Tell me if the pain changes, if it gets hot or starts to throb differently." "I will," Thea promised. She watched his hands work, noting the care he took, the gentleness that seemed at odds with his warrior's bearing. "Where did you learn healing?" "From my grandmother," Nodin said. A ghost of a smile crossed his face. She knew every plant in these mountains, what it could do, how much would cure, and how much would kill. The whites called her a medicine woman, but that word does not capture what she was. She was a keeper of knowledge that went back generations. She could set broken bones, deliver babies, draw poison from snake bites. When she died 5 years ago, much of that knowledge died with her. "But not all of it," Thea said. "Not all of it," Nodin agreed. He finished wrapping the fresh bandage and sat back. "She made sure I learned. Said that knowledge unused is knowledge lost, and our people could not afford to lose any more. She was right. Every year, more of the old ways disappear. More of our language is forgotten. More of our stories fade." He stood abruptly, as if realizing he had said too much. "We need to move. The sun will burn off this morning fog in an hour, and Garrett's men will start searching at first light. I want distance between us and them before the day gets warm." They left the cave as the forest was waking around them. Birds called in the canopy overhead, their songs bright against the gray dawn. Somewhere distant, a deer crashed through the underbrush, spooked by some real or imagined threat. Nodin led them higher up the mountain, following trails that were invisible to Thea's eyes but clear as roads to him. The climbing was brutal. Thea's legs trembled with effort after the first hour. Her wounded shoulder threw off her balance, making her stumble over roots and rocks that she would have easily navigated when whole. Twice she fell, catching herself with her good hand, biting back sounds of pain that wanted to escape. Nodin never complained about her pace, never showed impatience or frustration. He simply adjusted his speed to match hers, staying close enough to catch her if she fell, but far enough ahead to scout the path. Occasionally he would stop and listen, his head tilted, reading sounds in the forest that Thea could not distinguish. By mid-morning, they reached a ridge that looked out over miles of forested mountains. The view was breathtaking despite everything. Ridge after ridge stretched to the horizon, dark green and ancient, untouched by civilization's hand. Somewhere far below, a river glinted silver in the strengthening sunlight. "We are being followed," Nodin said quietly. Thea's heart jumped into her throat. "How do you know?" "I have not heard anything. The birds stopped singing behind us an hour ago," Nodin explained. "And look there, where the forest meets that clearing. See how the ravens are circling. Something disturbed them. Something moving through the trees too large to be an animal." Thea looked where he pointed and saw the black shapes wheeling against the sky. "How many?" "At least 3 men. Maybe more. They are tracking us, but they are not woodsmen. They move too loud, break too many branches. Still, they are persistent. And they are gaining ground because you are wounded." The words were not meant as accusation, but they landed like one anyway. Thea felt shame burn in her chest. "I am slowing you down. If you left me here, doubled back, you could lose them easily." Nodin's response was immediate and sharp. "I do not abandon people who need help. That is not who I am. That is not who my people are, no matter what the whites say about us." "I am sorry," Thea said quickly. "I did not mean—" "I know what you meant," Nodin interrupted, his tone softening slightly. "You are afraid. Fear makes people say things they do not mean. But understand this. I chose to help you. That choice was mine, freely made. I do not regret it, and I will not abandon it now because the path is harder than expected." He turned from the view and studied the terrain around them. His eyes moved constantly, cataloging options, calculating risks. "There is a way," he said finally. "Dangerous, but it might buy us the time we need." "What kind of dangerous?" Thea asked. "The kind where if I am wrong, we both die," Nodin admitted. "But if I am right, Garrett's men will lose our trail completely, and we gain a full day's lead. Maybe more." Thea looked back the way they had come, thinking about the men following them, about Garrett's determination, about what would happen if they were caught. "Tell me what you need me to do." Nodin led her along the ridge to a place where the mountain face dropped away almost vertically. Far below, a river churned white over black rocks. The sound of it was a constant roar, loud enough that they had to raise their voices to be heard. A narrow deer trail ran along the cliff face, barely wide enough for one person. "We follow this trail for half a mile," Nodin explained. "It will take us down to the river level. Once there, we wade upstream for another mile. The water will hide our tracks, wash away our scent. By the time Garrett's men find where we left the ridge, we will be long gone, and they will have no trail to follow." Thea looked at the cliff face, at the narrow trail, at the long drop to the rocks below. "And if I fall?" "Then I catch you," Nodin said simply. "Or we both fall together. Either way, you will not fall alone." There was something in his voice, some quality of absolute certainty, that made Thea believe him. She nodded. "Let us do it." The trail was everything she feared and worse. The path was crumbling in places, washed out by rain and eroded by wind. Loose stones shifted underfoot with every step. The drop to the right was absolute and terrifying. nothing but empty air and the promise of sharp rocks below. Thea pressed herself against the cliff face, moving sideways, her good hand finding holds in the rough stone. Behind her, Nodin moved with sure confidence. His body balanced perfectly, even on the treacherous surface. "Do not look down," he advised. "Eyes on the path ahead. Just the next step. Then the next. Do not think about anything else." But not thinking was impossible. Every time a stone shifted under Thea's boot, her heart stopped. Every time the wind gusted up from the canyon below, she was certain it would pluck her from the cliff face and send her tumbling. Sweat ran down her back despite the cold. Her legs shook not just from exertion but from pure fear. They were halfway across when disaster struck. A section of trail that looked solid gave way beneath Thea's weight. She felt the ground disappear, felt herself beginning to fall. Her scream was lost in the roar of the river below. But before she had fallen more than a few inches, Nodin's hand clamped around her wrist like iron. He hauled her back against the cliff face with strength that seemed impossible. His other hand found a hold in the rock, anchoring them both. For a long moment, they stood pressed together on what remained of the trail, breathing hard, neither daring to move. "I have you," Nodin said directly into her ear. "I will not let you fall. Do you hear me? I will not let you fall." Thea could only nod. Words had abandoned her. Terror had turned her throat into stone. But Nodin's hand was still on her wrist, solid and real, and slowly her breathing began to steady. "We keep moving," Nodin said. "Slowly, carefully, but we keep moving. The longer we stay here, the more dangerous this becomes." They completed the crossing one agonizing step at a time. When they finally reached the point where the trail widened and descended to river level, Thea's legs gave out completely. She collapsed onto solid ground and lay there shaking, unable to speak, unable to think beyond the simple fact that she was alive. Nodin gave her exactly 1 minute to recover. Then he pulled her to her feet with gentle insistence. "Into the water now. We need to put distance behind us while we still can." The river was shockingly cold, fed by snowmelt from higher elevations. It hit Thea like a physical blow, stealing her breath. The current was strong but not overwhelming, pulling at her legs with persistent force. Nodin moved upstream, staying near the bank where the water was shallower, and Thea followed. Walking through rushing water with a gunshot wound was a special kind of torture. Every step required concentration. Every moment demanded balance. The cold numbed her feet and legs but did nothing for the fire in her shoulder. Rocks hidden beneath the surface tried to trip her. Branches reached out from the bank to snag her clothing. They waited for what felt like hours but was probably less than one. Finally, Nodin guided them out of the water and into dense forest on the far bank. He found a sheltered spot beneath an overhanging rock and called a halt. Thea sank down gratefully, too exhausted even to shiver despite being soaked to the skin. "Rest here," Nodin said. "I am going to backtrack, make sure they did not somehow pick up our trail. If I am not back in an hour, head north. Follow the river until you reach a lightning-struck pine that stands alone in a clearing. From there, you will see smoke from sanctuary." "Wait," Thea said, alarm rising in her chest. "You are leaving me here? What if something happens to you?" "Then you keep going," Nodin replied matter-of-factly. "You survive. You reach sanctuary. You make all of this mean something." "That is not fair," Thea protested. "You do not get to save me and then disappear. That is not how this works." Nodin crouched down so they were eye to eye. "Listen to me. Garrett wants you, not me. If they somehow catch up, I can lead them away, give you time to escape. But you need to promise me something. If I do not come back, you do not wait. You do not try to find me. You go north and you survive. Promise me." Thea wanted to argue, wanted to refuse. But she saw the determination in his eyes and knew that arguing would waste precious time. "I promise," she said. "But you better come back." "I intend to," Nodin said. Then he was gone, moving through the forest with such silence that within seconds she could no longer hear him at all. Alone, Thea became aware of every sound in the forest. The drip of water from leaves, the scurry of small animals in the underbrush, the distant call of a hawk hunting. Each sound could be innocent or could be danger. She had no way to know which. She checked her wound, peeling back the wet bandage carefully. The medicine had mostly washed away in the river, but the wound itself still looked clean. No red streaks radiating outward. No heat beyond what the cauterization had caused. She was lucky, luckier than she had any right to be. The hours stretched endlessly. Thea counted heartbeats, trying to measure time, but kept losing count. The cold was starting to seep into her bones now, making her teeth chatter. She needed to move, to generate warmth, but Nodin had told her to stay put. So she stayed, wrapping her arms around herself, willing him to return. When he finally emerged from the trees, relief flooded through her so powerfully that she almost wept. Nodin looked grim but satisfied. "They lost us at the cliff," he reported. "I watched them from above. They stood at the edge arguing about whether we would be foolish enough to try the crossing. Eventually they decided we must have doubled back. They are heading the wrong direction now, so we are safe?" Thea asked. "Safer," Nodin corrected. "But not safe. Garrett will figure out eventually that they lost us at the cliff. He will send men around both ways."
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us now. Back to the story.
"But we have bought time, maybe a full day. If we push hard, we can reach Sanctuary by tomorrow night." "I do not know if I can push hard," Thea admitted. "I am already running on empty." Nodin studied her for a long moment. Then he did something unexpected. He smiled, a real smile that reached his eyes and transformed his face. "You just crossed a cliff face on a crumbling trail with a bullet wound in your shoulder. You waded through a freezing river for an hour without complaint. You have more strength than you think you do. Your body may be tired, but your spirit is still fighting." "My spirit feels pretty tired too," Thea said, but she smiled back weakly. "Then we rest a bit longer," Nodin decided. He gathered dry wood and built a small fire using rocks to shield it from view. The warmth was bliss. Thea held her hands out to it, feeling slowly returning to her numb fingers. Nodin produced more dried meat and hard bread from his pack, along with a leather flask. "Tea," he explained, handing it to her. "Made from willow bark and other herbs. It will help with pain and give you energy. Drink all of it." The tea was bitter but warming. Thea drank it down and felt something shift in her body. Some reserve of strength she had not known she still possessed rising to the surface. "What is in this?" "My grandmother's recipe," Nodin said. "She used to say that the body has 3 reserves of energy. The first is what you use every day. The second is what you draw on when you are tired. The third is for survival, and most people never learn how to access it. This tea opens the door to that third reserve. Will there be a cost later?" Thea asked. She had heard of such medicines before, stimulants that gave false energy and left the user worse off afterward. "There is always a cost," Nodin admitted. "But the cost of not drinking it is higher. When we reach Sanctuary, you can rest for as long as you need. But first we have to get there." They sat in silence for a while, warming themselves by the fire, gathering strength for the journey ahead. Thea found herself studying Nodin's profile, the strong line of his jaw, the way his eyes constantly scanned their surroundings, even while resting. He was unlike anyone she had ever known, this man who owed her nothing but had risked everything. "Why did you never marry?" she asked suddenly. The question surprised even her, coming out unbidden. Nodin glanced at her. something unreadable flickering in his expression. "What makes you think I did not? Did you?" Thea pressed. "No," he admitted after a pause. "I was supposed to. There was a woman in my village, chosen by our families when we were children. Good woman, kind, strong. But after my sister died, after Amma was taken and killed, something in me changed. I could not imagine bringing children into a world that treated my people this way. Could not imagine watching them grow up, knowing they would face the same hatred, the same violence, the same slow erosion of everything that made us who we were. So you chose to be alone," Thea said softly. "I chose to not pass my grief to another generation," Nodin corrected. "There is a difference. And maybe I was wrong. Maybe I was a coward. But it was my choice to make. You are not a coward," Thea said with certainty. "A coward would have left me in his yard to save his own skin. You are many things, Nodin, but coward is not one of them." He looked at her then, really looked at her, and Thea felt something pass between them. Some recognition or understanding that had nothing to do with words. The moment stretched, filled with possibility and danger in equal measure. Then Nodin stood, breaking the spell. "We should move. The day is getting away from us and we still have miles to cover." They traveled through the afternoon, climbing steadily north and east. The forest changed around them as they gained elevation. The massive redwoods gave way to smaller pines and firs. The air grew thinner, harder to breathe. But with each mile, Thea felt the noose of Garrett's pursuit loosening slightly. As the sun began its descent toward the western horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold, Nodin stopped on a rise and pointed. Far ahead, barely visible through the trees, Thea could see smoke rising. "Not just one fire but many, Sanctuary," Nodin said. "We will be there by full dark if we keep this pace." Thea stared at that distant smoke and felt something she had not felt in days. Hope, real, genuine hope that she might actually survive this. That she might actually be free. But even as that hope bloomed in her chest, she heard something that made her blood run cold. A dog baying in the distance. Then another. And another. Garrett had brought hounds. Nodin heard it too. His face went hard. "Run," he said. "Now." And as the sound of dogs drew closer and the safety of Sanctuary remained maddeningly out of reach, Thea understood that their ordeal was far from over. The final test was still ahead. The baying of the hounds grew louder with each passing minute, a sound that turned Thea's blood to ice water. She had heard dogs hunt before, knew that sound meant they had picked up a scent and were following it with single-minded determination. Nodin grabbed her hand and pulled her forward, no longer following a careful path but simply moving as fast as the terrain allowed. How did they get dogs up here so fast? Thea gasped, stumbling over a root and catching herself against a tree. "Garrett must have sent for them yesterday," Nodin replied, his voice tight with concentration. "Probably had them brought up from one of the mining camps. Those men use hounds to track claim jumpers and escaped workers. The dogs are trained to follow a scent across water, through mud, anywhere a man can go. Then we cannot outrun them," Thea said. The tea Nodin had given her was wearing off, and exhaustion was creeping back into her limbs like poison. "Even if I was whole and healthy, we could not outrun dogs. We do not need to outrun them," Nodin said. He veered suddenly to the left, heading toward a rocky outcropping that jutted from the mountainside like a broken tooth. "We need to outsmart them. And their handlers." They reached the rocks and Nodin began climbing immediately, pulling himself up with practiced ease. He turned back and extended his hand to Thea. "Come on. We go up, up." Thea looked at the sheer rock face rising above them. "I can barely walk." "You expect me to climb?" "I expect you to survive," Nodin shot back. "The dogs can track our scent on the ground, but they cannot climb rock. If we get high enough, we break the trail. They will lose us." Thea grabbed his hand and let him pull her up onto the first ledge. Pain screamed through her wounded shoulder, but she gritted her teeth and kept moving. Behind them, the sound of the dogs was getting closer, accompanied now by the shouts of men crashing through the forest. The climb was a nightmare. Each handhold had to be found and tested. Each foothold could be the one that gave way and sent her tumbling. Noden climbed above her, finding the path and then guiding her to follow. When her strength faltered, his hand was there to pull her up. When her foot slipped, his voice was there to steady her. "Do not look down," he reminded her again. Just up, always up. They had climbed perhaps 30 feet when the first dog burst into the clearing below. It was a massive bloodhound, all muscle and determination, its nose to the ground. It circled the base of the rocks, baying furiously, trying to find where the scent trail continued. 2 more dogs joined it within seconds, all 3 throwing themselves against the rock face in frustration. "They have them treed," a man's voice called out. Thea recognized it as the scarred man from Garrett's crew. "Up on those rocks. No way down except through us." More men arrived, at least 6 that Thea could see. They spread out around the base of the outcropping, rifles ready, cutting off any escape route. Then Garrett himself emerged from the trees, riding a horse that looked far too fine for these rough mountains. He sat in the saddle like a king surveying his domain. "Well now," Garrett called up to them, his voice carrying easily in the mountain air. "This has been quite the chase, Thea. I have to admit, you have surprised me. I did not think you had this much fight in you. But it is over now. You are trapped. Come down, and we can talk this through like reasonable people." "Go to hell," Thea shouted down. The words came out stronger than she felt, fueled by anger and desperation. Garrett laughed. "There is that spirit I always admired. But spirit only gets you so far. Eventually, reality has to be faced. And the reality is that you are cornered on a rock with nowhere to go. You can come down on your own, or my men can come up and get you. Either way, you are coming down. Send them up then," Noden called down. His voice was calm, almost amused. "See how many make it to the top." One of Garrett's men, emboldened by numbers, started to climb. He made it perhaps 10 feet before Noden simply kicked the loose rock free. It tumbled down and struck the man on the shoulder, sending him falling back to the ground with a cry of pain. The message was clear. Anyone who tried to climb would be easy prey, you see? Garrett said, his voice hardening. "The savage is willing to kill to keep you." Does that sound like someone trying to help you, Thea? Or does it sound like someone who wants to use you for his own purposes? "It sounds like someone defending me," Thea shot back. "Which is more than my own father ever did. Your father is worried sick," Garrett lied smoothly. "He asked me to bring you home safely. Begged me, in fact. Whatever you think happened, whatever misunderstanding occurred, it can be fixed. But not if you stay up there with a man who will get you killed." Thea felt Noden tense beside her. She put her hand on his arm, a silent plea not to respond to the provocation. They both knew Garrett was lying. Her father had made his choice when he signed those papers. There would be no tearful reunion, no fixing of misunderstandings. "We can wait," Garrett continued when neither of them responded. "We have supplies. We have water. We have time. How long can you last up there with no food and no shelter? A day? 2? Eventually, you will have to come down. And I am a patient man when I need to be." He was right, and they all knew it. The rock face offered no shelter from wind or weather. They had no food beyond what little remained in Noden's pack. No water except what they had drunk from the river hours ago. They could hold out for a while, but not indefinitely. Noden leaned close to Thea and spoke directly into her ear, his voice barely above a whisper. "There is another way off this rock. On the far side, where they cannot see. The climb is harder, more dangerous, but it leads to a narrow chimney that opens onto the ridge above. If we can reach it before they realize what we are doing, we can get away. If? Thea whispered back. What are the chances? Better than staying here and starving, Nodin replied. But we need to move now, while they are all watching this side. Once we start, we cannot stop. If they see us and come around, we will be completely exposed. Thea looked at the men below, at Garrett sitting comfortably on his horse, at the dogs still baying at the base of the rocks. Then she looked at Nodin, at the determination in his eyes, at the strength that seemed to radiate from him even now. Let us do it. They moved slowly, carefully, working their way horizontally across the rock face toward the far side. Every movement had to be calculated. Every handhold tested before committing weight to it. The rock was rough and sharp, cutting into Thea's palms, but she did not dare complain. Below and behind them, Garrett's voice continued its monologue, trying to wear them down with words. They had almost reached the far edge when disaster struck. Thea's boot slipped on a patch of loose gravel. She scrambled for purchase, her fingers clawing at the rock, but there was nothing to grab. She felt herself falling backward, felt the empty air opening up beneath her. Nodin's hand shot out and caught her wrist. The sudden stop wrenched her wounded shoulder brutally, and this time she could not contain her scream. The sound echoed across the mountainside, sharp and unmistakable. Below, the voices of Garrett's men rose in excitement. Around the other side, Garrett shouted. They are trying to escape. Cut them off. Men began running, circling the outcropping to see where Thea and Nodin were going. Nodin hauled Thea back against the rock face with desperate strength. Can you keep going? He asked urgently. Thea's shoulder was on fire. She could feel fresh blood seeping through the bandage, the wound reopened by the violent movement. But she looked into Nodin's eyes and nodded. I can keep going. They abandoned stealth for speed now. Nodin led them around to the far side, where a vertical crack split the rock face from bottom to top. The chimney he had mentioned was narrower than Thea had imagined, barely wide enough for a person to squeeze through. Nodin went first, wedging himself into the crack and using opposing pressure on the walls to climb. Like this, he called down. Back against one wall, feet against the other. Press out with everything you have and inch your way up. Do not try to climb like a ladder. The pressure is what holds you. Thea wedged herself into the crack and immediately understood why Nodin had called this more dangerous. If she slipped, there would be no catching herself. She would fall the full 30 feet to the rocks below. But Garrett's men were coming around the outcropping now, would be in position to shoot within minutes. She had no choice. She began to climb. Every inch was agony. Her wounded shoulder could barely take the pressure needed to hold herself in place. Sweat poured down her face despite the cold. Her legs trembled with effort. Above her, Nodin climbed steadily, calling down encouragement, telling her she was doing well, that she was almost there. A gunshot cracked. The bullet struck rock inches from Thea's head, sending stone chips flying. She flinched instinctively and almost lost her grip. Below, she could hear Garrett screaming at his men. Do not shoot her, you idiots. I need her alive. Shoot the Indian if you want, but not the girl. More shots followed, all aimed at Nodin. Thea heard him grunt once, heard rocks falling, and her heart stopped. But when she looked up, he was still climbing, still moving. Blood running down his arm from where a bullet had grazed him. Keep climbing, Nodin commanded. Do not stop. Do not look down. Just climb. The chimney seemed to go on forever, each foot gained feeling like a mile traveled. Thea's arms were shaking so badly she did not know how they continued to hold her weight. Her legs burned with lactic acid. Her shoulders screamed protests that her mind could barely process. But she kept moving because the alternative was death or capture. And both were unacceptable. Finally, after what felt like hours but was probably only minutes, she felt Nodin's hand grab her arm and pull her up over the lip of the chimney. They collapsed together on the ridgetop, both gasping for air, both bleeding, both pushed far beyond what their bodies should have been able to endure. "We did it," Thea panted. "We actually did it. We are not safe yet," Noden warned. He pushed himself to his feet, despite the blood running down his arm. "They will come up another way." Garrett is not the type to give up just because we climbed higher. He was right. Even now, Thea could hear Garrett organizing his men, splitting them into groups. Some would stay at the base to prevent them from doubling back. Others would circle around to find an easier path up. The chase was far from over, but when Thea looked in the direction of Sanctuary, she saw that they were much closer now. The smoke from multiple fires was clearly visible, and she thought she could make out buildings in the distance. "How far?" she asked. 3 miles, Noden estimated. "Maybe 4. We can make it before dark if we move fast." "I do not know if I have fast left in me," Thea admitted. Her body was starting to shut down, the adrenaline that had carried her through the climb fading rapidly. Noden looked at her, really looked at her, taking in her pallor, her trembling, the blood seeping through her bandages. "Then I will carry you. You are wounded too," Thea protested. "And exhausted." "You cannot. Watch me," Noden said. He bent down and lifted her onto his back, settling her weight carefully. "Hold on, and do not let go no matter what happens." He began to run. Not the desperate sprint of someone fleeing in panic, but the steady ground-eating lope of someone who knew how to pace himself for distance. Thea wrapped her good arm around his shoulders and held on, marveling at the strength in this man who refused to give up even when any reasonable person would have. Behind them, the sounds of pursuit continued. Dogs baying, men shouting, Garrett's voice rising above it all, promising rewards to whoever brought them down. But with each step, Sanctuary drew closer. With each minute, safety became more possible. They were perhaps a mile from the settlement when Noden suddenly stopped. Thea felt his body go rigid beneath her. "What is wrong?" she asked. "Look," Noden said quietly, nodding ahead. Thea looked and her heart sank. Between them and Sanctuary, a line of men had appeared. At least a dozen of them, armed and mounted, spreading across the approach to cut off their escape. Garrett must have sent riders ahead, must have planned for this exact scenario. They had been outmaneuvered. "We are trapped," Thea whispered. "Behind and ahead." "There is nowhere left to run." Noden set her down gently and unslung his rifle. He checked his ammunition with practiced efficiency. "Then we do not run anymore," he said. His voice was calm, resigned, but not defeated. "We stand against a dozen men?" Thea looked at the line of riders, then back the way they had come where more of Garrett's forces would soon arrive. "That is suicide." "Maybe," Noden agreed. "But at least it is our choice. At least we go down fighting, rather than surrendering to men who would use you and kill me. There is honor in that." Thea felt tears burning in her eyes, though whether from exhaustion, pain, or despair she could not say. They had come so far, fought so hard, survived so much, and now it was going to end here within sight of safety, because one man could not accept being told, no, but then something unexpected happened. From the direction of Sanctuary, more figures emerged. These were not Garrett's men. They moved differently, carried themselves with a different bearing. Miners with pickaxes, women with rifles, even a few other Cahto warriors, their faces painted for war. A man rode forward from this new group, sitting tall in his saddle. He was older, maybe 60, with a face weathered by decades of mountain living. When he spoke, his voice carried authority that came not from wealth or position, but from respect earned through hard years. "Garrett Hollis," the man called out. "You are not welcome in Sanctuary. Turn around and ride back down this mountain before this gets ugly." Garrett emerged from the trees behind Noden and Thea, his face twisted with rage. "This is none of your concern, Mackenzie. That woman belongs to me." Her father signed legal documents. "I have every right. You have no rights here," the man called Mackenzie interrupted. "Sanctuary is neutral ground. Always has been. You want to pursue your vendettas, you do it somewhere else. Not here." The two groups of armed men faced each other across the mountain meadow. The tension was thick enough to cut with a knife. One wrong word, one nervous trigger finger, and the whole thing would explode into violence. Thea felt Noden's hand find hers and squeeze gently. Neither of them spoke. They simply stood together and waited to see which way the wind would blow. And in that moment of perfect tension, with her freedom and her life hanging in the balance, Thea understood something profound. She had spent so long being afraid, so long letting other people make her choices, that she had forgotten she had power too. Not the power of money or guns or legal documents, but the power to choose who she wanted to be. She stepped forward, pulling away from Noden's protective presence. Her legs shook. Her shoulder throbbed. Blood and dirt covered her torn dress. But she stood as tall as she could and looked directly at Garrett. "I am not your property," she said. Her voice was not loud, but in the charged silence it carried perfectly. "I never was. I never will be. You can chase me to the ends of the earth if you want, but you will never own me. Because I would rather die free than live as your possession." Garrett's face went purple with rage. For a moment, Thea thought he might shoot her right there, just to spite her. But Mackenzie's people had their weapons raised, and even Garrett was not foolish enough to start a war he could not win. "This is not over," Garrett hissed. "You hear me, Thea? This is not over." "Yes, it is," Mackenzie said firmly. "It is over because I say it is over. Now get off this mountain before I have my people escort you down the hard way." For a long moment, nobody moved. Then Garrett wheeled his horse around and rode back into the trees. His men followed, some reluctantly, others eager to be away from a situation that had turned against them. The dogs were called back. The sounds of pursuit faded into the distance. Thea's legs finally gave out. She collapsed to her knees in the grass, shaking with reaction. It was over. They had actually made it. They were safe. Noden knelt beside her and pulled her against his chest. She buried her face in his shoulder and finally let herself cry, great racking sobs that came from somewhere deep inside. All the fear and pain and exhaustion of the past days poured out of her while Noden held her and said nothing. Just let her feel everything she had been too busy surviving to acknowledge. When she finally raised her head, Mackenzie had dismounted and was walking toward them. Up close, he looked kind, his eyes crinkled with smile lines. "Welcome to Sanctuary," he said. "Let us get you both cleaned up and fed. Then you can tell us your story. And we can figure out what comes next, what came next." Thea had not thought that far ahead, had not dared to imagine a future beyond simple survival. But now, with safety assured and Garrett's threat receding, she had to face a new question. What did she want her life to be? Sanctuary was not what Thea had imagined. She had pictured rough shacks and desperate people hiding from the law. Instead, she found a community that had carved purpose from hardship. The buildings were solid timber construction, built to last through mountain winters. Gardens grew behind nearly every home, carefully tended despite the short growing season. Children played in the central square while their mothers worked, and their fathers returned from hunting or timber cutting. Mackenzie led them to a large cabin that served as a communal hall. Inside, a woman with steel-gray hair and steady hands took one look at Thea and immediately began issuing orders. Her name was Ruth, and she had been a field nurse during the war. She did not ask questions, did not demand explanations. She simply set to work cleaning and rebandaging Thea's wound with supplies that put Noden's wilderness medicine to shame. "The cauterization saved your life," Ruth said as she worked. "Crude but effective. Whoever did this knew what they were doing. But you have pushed this wound hard. Too hard. Another day of running, and you would have torn it open completely. As it is, you need at least 2 weeks of rest before you do anything more strenuous than walking to the outhouse. 2 weeks, Thea repeated. The time frame felt both impossibly long and wonderfully short. 2 weeks of not running. 2 weeks of not looking over her shoulder. 2 weeks to simply exist without fear. Noden was being tended to in the corner by an older Cahto man who spoke to him in their shared language. The bullet graze on his arm was superficial but needed cleaning. Thea watched them talk, watched the way Noden's shoulders slowly relaxed as he spoke his native tongue with someone who understood not just the words but the weight behind them. "You are lucky to have him," Ruth said, following Thea's gaze. "Noden is known in these parts. A good man. Quiet, keeps to himself mostly, but always willing to help when someone needs it. 3 winters ago, he spent a week tracking a lost child through a blizzard. Found the boy half frozen in a cave and carried him back on his shoulders. Did not ask for thanks or payment. Just went back to his cabin like it was nothing." Thea felt something warm bloom in her chest at the story. It fit with everything she knew about Noden, everything she had witnessed over their days together. He was a man who helped because it was right, not because it benefited him. "How did you end up here?" Thea asked Ruth, partly to distract herself from the pain of having her wound cleaned, and partly because she was genuinely curious. "Same as most folks in Sanctuary," Ruth replied. "I was running from something I could not outfight. After the war, I went back to Virginia expecting to rebuild my life. But my husband did not come home from Gettysburg, and his brother decided that meant I was his property now. Tried to force me into marriage, claimed it was what my husband would have wanted. When I refused, he tried to take by force what I would not give freely." Ruth's hands never stopped moving as she spoke, her fingers steady despite the memories she was recounting. "I shot him. Not dead, but close enough that he will never walk right again. Then I ran. Knew I could not get a fair trial, not with his family's influence. So I came west, kept moving until I found this place. Been here 5 years now. Built a life. Found peace. Does it ever stop?" Thea asked quietly. "The looking over your shoulder? The wondering if today is the day they find you?" Ruth paused and met Thea's eyes directly. "Eventually. Not all at once, but bit by bit. You wake up one morning and realize you slept through the night without nightmares. Then a week passes where you did not think about him at all. The fear does not disappear, but it loses its teeth. It becomes something you carry rather than something that carries you." The words settled over Thea like a promise. She wanted to believe them, wanted to imagine a future where Garrett was just a bad memory rather than a constant threat. Over the next week, Thea discovered what Ruth meant. Sanctuary operated on principles that the outside world had forgotten or never learned. People helped each other not because they expected payment, but because survival in the mountains required cooperation. Food was shared. Work was divided according to ability. Disputes were settled through discussion rather than violence. Thea was given a small cabin that had belonged to a prospector who died the previous winter. It was simple but solid, with a good fireplace and a bed that felt like luxury after days of sleeping on the ground. Women from the community brought her food, spare clothes, blankets. No one asked for her story in detail. They had all run from something. They understood the need for privacy around old wounds. Noden visited every day. At first, he came to check her wound, to make sure infection had not set in. But as the days passed, his visits lengthened. They would sit by her fire and talk about small things. The weather. The upcoming winter. Which trails would be passable and which would be buried under snow. Conversations that felt both mundane and profound in their normalcy. On the 8th day, Thea was strong enough to walk without pain shooting through her shoulder. Noden took her on a tour of Sanctuary, showing her the smokehouse where meat was preserved for winter months. The communal root cellar dug deep into the mountainside where vegetables stayed cool. The small chapel that served all faiths and none. At the edge of the settlement, they stood looking out over the valley below. "I am thinking of staying," Thea said. The words came out tentatively, like she was testing how they sounded. "Not just until I heal, but staying. Building a life here." Noden was quiet for a long moment. "What about your father? Your old life?" "My father made his choice when he sold me," Thea replied. "And my old life was never really mine to begin with. It was always what someone else wanted me to be. Here, I could be who I actually am. Whoever that turns out to be." "And what if Garrett comes back?" Noden asked. "What if he brings an army next time?" "Then I will face it," Thea interrupted. She turned to look at him directly. "I spent so long being afraid. So long letting fear make my decisions. I am tired of running. I want to stand still for a while. Want to put down roots. Want to see what kind of person I can become when I am not constantly terrified." Noden smiled, one of his rare full smiles that transformed his whole face. "Then stay. Build your life. And if Garrett comes back, he will have to go through all of us to get to you. Would you do that?" Thea asked. "Fight for me again? Even after everything you have already risked?" Without hesitation, Noden said simply. Something shifted between them in that moment. Some barrier that had existed since they met, born of circumstance and survival, finally crumbled. Thea stepped closer. Noden did not move away. The space between them felt charged with possibility. "I do not know how to do this," Thea admitted. "How to be close to someone without feeling trapped. How to trust without fear. Garrett took so much from me before I even belonged to him. I do not know what is left. You do not have to know right now," Noden said. He reached out and took her hand, the gesture careful and deliberate. "We have time. Time to figure out what this is. Time to heal. Time to become whoever we are meant to be, together or apart. There is no rush." Thea squeezed his hand, feeling the calluses there, the strength, the steadiness that had saved her life. "Together," she said. "I think I would like to try together." The winter that followed was the hardest Thea had ever experienced, and also the most beautiful. Snow buried the mountains under 15 feet of white silence. Temperatures dropped so low that water froze solid in its buckets overnight. The community contracted, everyone staying close to their fires, venturing out only when necessary. But Thea found joy in the hardship. Joy in learning to split wood efficiently. Joy in mastering the art of keeping a fire burning all night. Joy in the quiet evenings spent with Noden, teaching him to read better while he taught her his language. They moved slowly, carefully, two people learning to trust after trauma. Some nights they sat on opposite sides of her cabin, content with simple presence. Other nights, they sat close enough to touch, hands intertwined, finding comfort in contact. Ruth taught Thea the basics of field medicine. How to set broken bones. How to stitch wounds. How to recognize infection before it became deadly. "Knowledge is freedom," Ruth said during one lesson. "The more you can do for yourself, the less you need from others. And in a place like this, that knowledge can mean the difference between life and death." Mackenzie taught her to shoot. Not just point and pull a trigger, but truly shoot. How to breathe. How to account for wind and distance. How to make every bullet count. "I hope you never need this," he said. But hope is not a plan. Better to have the skill and not need it than need it and not have it. Spring came late to the mountains, creeping in gradually through March and into April. Snow melted. Streams swelled with runoff. The first green shoots pushed through the newly exposed earth. And with spring came the reality Thea had been dreading. Garrett had not forgotten. Had not forgiven. The messenger arrived on a warm afternoon in early May. He was a young man, barely 20, who wore the look of someone carrying news he wished he could undeliver. Mackenzie gathered the community in the central square to hear what he had to say. "Garrett Hollis is coming," the messenger reported. "He has been gathering men all winter, miners, trappers, drifters, anyone willing to carry a gun for pay. He has maybe 40 men now, and he is marching them up this mountain. He sent me ahead to deliver his terms." "What terms?" Mackenzie asked, though his tone suggested he already knew. "He wants the woman called Thea Bowman," the messenger said. "Says she is his legal property. Says if you hand her over, he will leave Sanctuary in peace. But if you harbor her, he will burn this place to the ground and everyone in it." The silence that followed was profound. 40 men was an army by frontier standards. Sanctuary had perhaps 20 people capable of fighting, and that was counting women and older men. The odds were not good. "When?" Mackenzie asked. 3 days, the messenger replied. "He is moving slow because of the supplies he is bringing. But he is coming, and he says nothing will stop him this time." All eyes turned to Thea. She felt the weight of their gazes, felt the unspoken question hanging in the air. Was she worth fighting for? Was she worth dying for? It would be so easy to leave, to walk down that mountain and surrender herself to Garrett, to sacrifice her freedom so these people who had taken her in could live. But then Noden stepped forward and stood beside her. Then Ruth, then Mackenzie. One by one, every person in that square moved to stand with Thea rather than against her. They made their choice without words, with simple physical presence. "Tell Garrett," Mackenzie said to the messenger, "that Sanctuary does not negotiate with bullies. Tell him that if he wants a war, he can have one. But tell him also that this mountain has a way of humbling men who think they own it. Tell him to think very carefully about whether one woman is worth the cost he is about to pay." The messenger nodded and rode away. The community dispersed to prepare. Weapons were cleaned and loaded. Barricades were planned. Children and those too old or infirm to fight were moved to the most defensible buildings. Sanctuary, which had been built as a refuge from violence, prepared itself for war. That night, Thea could not sleep. She stood outside her cabin, looking at the stars scattered across the black sky like thrown diamonds. She heard footsteps behind her and turned to find Noden approaching. "You should not have stayed," she said. "You could have left. Gone back to your cabin, your life. You do not owe me this." "I stayed because I chose to," Noden replied. "Same reason I pulled that bullet out of your shoulder. Same reason I carried you across this mountain. Not because I owed you, but because it was right. Because you mattered. Because somewhere along the way, your fight became my fight too. People are going to die," Thea whispered. "Good people. Because of me. Because I could not just accept my fate." "People die every day accepting their fate," Noden countered. "At least here, they die fighting for something that matters. For the principle that people are not property. That a woman's no means no, regardless of what papers were signed. That freedom is worth defending even when the odds are poor." The next 3 days passed in a blur of preparation. Trenches were dug at strategic points. Firing positions were established on rooftops and behind barricades. Every able-bodied drilled on what to do when the attack came. Thea learned to reload rifles quickly, to carry ammunition without spilling it, to help treat wounded under pressure. She would not be on the front line with her healing shoulder, but she would contribute however she could. On the morning of the 3rd day, Garrett's army appeared at the edge of the valley. 40 men, just as promised, armed with rifles and determination. They spread out in a line, impressive and intimidating. Garrett rode at their center, sitting tall in his saddle, looking every inch the conquering general. Mackenzie met them at the edge of Sanctuary's territory, backed by every person in the settlement who could hold a weapon. The two groups faced each other across 100 yards of open ground. The morning sun was bright and warm, birds sang in the trees, and the world seemed determined to pretend that violence was not about to unfold. "Last chance," Garrett called out. "Send out Thea Bowman and we ride away. No blood needs to be spilled today." "She is not going anywhere," Mackenzie replied. "So unless you brought enough bullets to kill us all, I suggest you turn around and find a new obsession." Garrett's face darkened. "So be it. You made your choice. Now live with it. Or die with it." He raised his hand to signal the attack. 40 rifles began to rise. 20 rifles on Sanctuary's side did the same. Thea felt time slow down, felt the moment stretching out. This was it. The moment that would decide everything. But before Garrett could drop his hand, a new sound cut through the morning air. Hoofbeats. Lots of them. Coming fast from the north. Both armies turned to look as riders poured over the ridge. 50 men at least, maybe more, all armed and riding like they meant business. At their head was a man Thea recognized from descriptions. A federal marshal whose territory included these mountains. Behind him rode deputies, soldiers from the nearest army post, even a few tribal police from the reservation. They swept down into the valley and positioned themselves between the two groups. "Jarrett Hollis," the marshal called out. "You are under arrest for attempted kidnapping, assault, destruction of property, and about a dozen other charges. Drop your weapon and surrender now." "On whose authority?" Garrett demanded, though his voice had lost its certainty. "On the authority of a federal judge who has been hearing complaints about you for months," the marshal replied. "Seems your business practices extend beyond forcing women into marriage. Labor violations, claim jumping, bribing officials. The list goes on. You should have left her alone, Garrett. Should have taken the loss and moved on. But you had to push. Now you get to answer for all of it." Garrett looked around at his hired army, at the marshal's force, at Sanctuary's defenders. The math had changed dramatically. Slowly, reluctantly, he lowered his weapon. His men followed suit. The marshal and his deputies moved through Garrett's force, disarming them, taking them into custody. Garrett was pulled from his horse and bound. As they led him past where Thea stood, he spat at her feet. "This is not over," he hissed. "Yes, it is," Thea replied. And this time, she meant it. She felt no triumph, just relief that the weight she had been carrying was finally lifted. The marshal approached Thea. "Miss Bowman, I apologize it took this long to intervene. Your father filed a missing person report 2 days after you disappeared. Showed up at my office looking like he had aged 10 years. Said he had made a terrible mistake and would spend the rest of his life trying to make it right if I could just find you alive." Thea did not know what to feel about that. Anger at his initial betrayal warred with hope that maybe reconciliation might be possible. But that was a bridge to consider later. The marshal departed with his prisoners. Sanctuary erupted in celebration, people embracing with the relief of danger past. But Thea felt strangely disconnected. She walked to the edge of the settlement and sat on a fallen log. Staring out at the mountains, Nodin found her there an hour later. He sat beside her in comfortable silence. "It is really over," Thea said finally. "Garrett is going to prison. My father wants to reconcile. I am free. Actually, truly free. So why do I feel so empty?" "Because you have been running so long that standing still feels wrong," Nodin replied. "Because you defined yourself by what you were escaping from, and now you have to figure out what you are running toward. That is harder. That requires building instead of fleeing. I do not know how to build," Thea admitted. "Then learn," Nodin said simply. "We all did. Everyone in Sanctuary came here broken in one way or another. We are all still learning. But at least here, we learn together." Thea leaned her head on his shoulder. "Will you teach me? How to live instead of just survive?" "Every day," Nodin promised. "For as long as you want me around, that might be a very long time," Thea warned. Nodin said. I have nowhere else to be. The sun was setting now, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and purples. Thea Bowman had run into these mountains hunted and terrified, with nothing but the clothes on her back and the desperate need to be free. She had been shot, burned, chased, and nearly killed a dozen different ways. But she had survived. More than survived. She had found a place where she belonged. People who saw her as human rather than property. A man who offered partnership rather than ownership. The woman who had stumbled into Noden's yard bleeding and broken no longer existed. In her place was someone stronger. Someone who knew her own worth. Someone who understood that freedom was not given, but taken, defended, and cherished every single day. She reached over and took Noden's hand. He squeezed back. And in that simple gesture, in that connection between two people who had saved each other in different ways, Thea found something she had been searching for her entire life without knowing it. Home. Not a place, but a feeling. Not walls and a roof, but people who chose to stand beside you when standing was hard. Not safety from all harm, but the knowledge that whatever came next, you would not face it alone. The stars were coming out now, one by one, filling the darkening sky with light. And Thea Bowman, once a prisoner of other people's expectations, now sat free beneath them all, ready to write the next chapter of her story. A chapter that was finally, completely, hers alone to write.
Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.